Hello everyone, this afternoon I have the pleasure of talking with Dan of a website, Police Abusing Powers. We've covered this website several times in the UK column because what they're producing is vital information about not only how the police and other authorities are abusing their powers and abusing the public, but also vast amounts of information about what the law actually says, about what lawful conduct is, about how the police and ordinary members of the public should conduct themselves. I found it a really extremely educational channel. I've learned a lot from it, and I'm very, very happy to welcome Dan to discuss these things with me today. Hello, Dan.
Hello, David. Thank you for inviting me on for a chat.
Just to kick things off, for anyone who doesn't follow your channel already, could you just give a little outline about the sort of things you cover and the style and approach you bring?
Yeah, of course. The whole channel, although it's called Police Abusing Powers, it's about highlighting anybody that's in a public office position, really. So whether that's police, councillors. I'm not very political, so I try not to worry too much about the politicians, although they do come up because of some of the incidents and things that they do. But anybody really in that position of authority or a position of trust that we're supposed to put our faith in, if they do something that they shouldn't do, if they breach their position of trust. And I try and highlight that to people that may not know that these things are going on, or may not know what their what's the word I'm thinking of? It's gone. Responsibilities. So members of the public that may not know what their responsibilities are or what they can do if they're faced with a similar situation. And we just try and break it down. Sometimes I get videos sent to me which I'll break down and explain the legislations that may have been used, if they have been misused, what the people should or shouldn't have done. And I also do a daily roundup of news. I scour the internet for articles that may be in small town newspapers, for example, that the mainstream media are not going to, they're not going to touch. And what I try and do is condense them down into a single place where people will be able to see the kind of things that generally get overlooked or hidden, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, this is very important. This is one of the reasons we have been following your channel on the UK column, because we're interested in giving people an understanding, the best understanding we can muster of what's happening in the world, and for them to be able to see events and understand them as with the greatest clarity. Yeah. And a lot of the time we will be quoting mainstream media sources and we'll be analysing them. But increasingly, some of the mainstream media sources have become useless. I mean, apart from comedic value or to illustrate how the lies are being promulgated, some of them, like the BBC, they're not the organisation they were 5 or 10 years ago, and the information they're putting out is, I mean, some of it's kind of infantile, a lot of it's propagandistic, and there's very little insight or honesty or even like curiosity. They're not going saying, well, that's a strange thing. What's happened there? They don't do that anymore because it's too dangerous. So what we're finding is more and more we're looking at other people in the alternative media as the real media. Yeah,
well, I think, sorry to interrupt you there, David, I think some of the mainstream media will just quote what they've been told by sources. So, for example, the police will give a statement. Now, rather than saying, well, the police have said X, Y, Z, and let's have a look at why they've said that, they just repeat exactly what they've been told. And that doesn't help anybody, in my opinion. Nobody learns anything from that. They just assume that what they're being told is, is the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so to speak. One of the things that I say to people is for example, on the television, you've got these police reality shows that are cleverly edited, especially now, that make it look like the police are constantly under attack and the police are, are on the receiving end all the time of serious incidents in people arguing and fighting them and, biting them, for example, or whatever it might be. When in fact, if you look at the wider picture, there's more people that are, in my opinion, from what I do, there's more people, general members of the public, that are faced with just as bad behaviour or treatment as the police are, but people don't see it because it's not funneled through their television into their square eyes all the time.
The point you made there about learning is vital. I mean, one of the reasons I do what I do is to learn not only how to stand up for the truth and how to resist, but what it is we're standing up for. And the mainstream media approach tends to be a reworking of the logical fallacy of an argument to authority. The authority says this, therefore there is nothing more to see. And that's repeated over and over and over, thousands of times a day, every day. And the message is, don't think, be stupid, don't question, do what you're told. And it's a huge dumbing down. And that's why sites like yourself, sites like us are growing in popularity, because people can go there and they can walk away with something worth thinking about, something worth researching, something that they can maybe add to, something that they might be able to use, in their own, how they conduct themselves in their own lives. They might just pick up a little pointer here or there, and get something actively useful out of the experience, rather than this kind of passive consuming of media, which is a very strange phrase, but you see quite a lot, where it's just being laid out to some people, and they're expected to accept everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've had some messages recently, actually, a couple of people that have told me that they've recently had some interactions with public officials, and literally because of my channel, because of some of the things that I've been through on the channel, they've said that they've been able to deal with that incident, in a way that they wouldn't have been able to before. Do you know what I mean? So they may have been stopped by the police, for example. And I do concentrate a lot on the police, but as I say, we cover sort of anybody that's in public office, really.
Well, this is a really vital thing, because I've seen this before. Because when people feel powerless, when people feel impotent, when people feel that there's nothing they can do and there's no justice possible, then they get angry. That's the reaction, right? Yeah. So the policeman or the traffic warden, whatever the official is, will get aggression and swear words and abuse, and then the whole thing escalates. Now, what learning does is it takes the need for that anger away.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Because you're able to say, no, you're not right there. Well, let me explain. And if what comes back is more lies, you say, well, I understand what you're saying, but you're not right. And everything becomes calmer. And also the authority kind of moves away from because the person doing the shouting and the screaming is not an authority. It's the person speaking quietly and with knowledge who's an authority. So it moves the balance of power in a way which can be quite dramatic in some cases, away from the official and towards the citizen. It's a vital service you're doing.
One of the things that you'll find is that when somebody learns, I'm still learning, so I don't want people to think that I'm sitting here and trying to put myself across as some kind of expert, so to speak. But I still learn. But what I do is I share what I learn, rather than keep it to myself. And that's what the channel's about, really. And what you'll find is that when people do have interactions, it's normally the authority or the person in the uniform, shall we say, that then is on the back foot a little bit, and they're the one that start to become a little bit aggressive in their tone with you because they know that they're losing an argument. I'm not suggesting that it's a good thing all the time, because they will abuse their positions, obviously, and there are ways that they can teach you a lesson. It's something that I've had to deal with myself. But if you remain calm, they may inconvenience you, but generally it will be an unlawful inconvenience. So then you've always got a follow-up to that. Do you know what I mean? You can always make that complaint, which will get dismissed, but then you can follow it through with personal claim, for example, civil claim, or whatever it might be you want to go down.
Yeah, I mean, this is when we come back to what the teaching a lesson thing, I think that's a really useful bit of information. But this is one of the things that attracted me to your channel in the first place. You're standing on the law, right? You're talking about how to behave lawfully, and under the law, there can never be violence, because there's always one person who's right and standing on the law, and that you can never have two equal claims and then just go at one another and the strongest arm wins, because that's jungle-like behavior. That's not how the law works. The law is there to eliminate conflict. Yeah. And we forget that, because it's constantly used to bring conflict to our doors, even if we are being peaceful men and women. So we've kind of got to expect that it's about something else. But at the heart, it's about eliminating conflict and finding peace with your fellow man. And when you bring that attitude towards things, they do tend to go better. And also, I mean, some of the things I've been working on in Scotland have involved taking cases forwards and advocating for people. And some of it's quite, some of it's involved child sexual abuse, paedophile rings, the cover-up of paedophilia, very heavy areas, and areas where you're going to get potentially a very severe response from anyone who feels threatened, or any state organisation that feels threatened. Yeah. Because everything we do when we promote these, when we follow up these cases, is based on the law, and whenever we're interacting with authorities, the first thing we tell them is we are standing on the law, and everything we are saying is based on the law. Yeah. It changes the dynamic quite significantly, and we're no longer. One of the key things is, if we understand and feel in our hearts that everyone's equal in a common law jurisdiction, and the authorities come and act, we can force them to acknowledge that. If we remember it, we can force the authorities to acknowledge that. It means that we have to treat them in the same way, and with the same consideration and compassion that you'd have for any other human being. But if the ordinary people can remember that we're all equal in the law, in a common law jurisdiction, then it's amazing what can be done. Yeah, of course. Even people in uniform are still culpable under common law. However, the thin blue line, as they call it, is getting thicker by the day, and that divides, whether that's the authorities feeling more empowered, or the authorities trying to lessen our power, is debatable. But there is definitely a wide gap, or a wider gap now than there ever was before. That's very true. I mean, we've noticed this as I've spoken to some retired police officers and people sort of surrounding the UK column and British Constitution Group and organisations like this. So people are interested in what the law is, and in the whole history of how we became the society that we are. When I talk to them about their policing practice, which is maybe 20, 30 years old, out of date now, and compare it to what's happening now, it's night and day. It's been totally transformed. And the thing that's been lost is the approach of the ordinary Bobby in the street which was that he could understand what the law was, he knew what the law was, and he was prepared to stand up for it as a thing, as a concept, as an entity that had some substance or certainty about it, as opposed to what have I been told to do today, or what have the rules and regulations become today. Right?
Yeah.
There used to be an idea that this was based on something ancient and profound and logical and with reason, and that the reasonable man or woman could see and understand and get. And that seems to have gone. There seems to be a completely different attitude. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, of course. Exactly what you said there about something that was ancient, so to speak, that people could understand. It has changed that much that literally nobody, and I say nobody, I mean a vast majority of the public, don't know anymore what their rights, what their duties and responsibilities are under the law, because of legislation, if you like. The common law has kind of been pushed to the back of the bookshelf, and all of these legislations and everything else are now filling up the space where it was. And people have completely forgotten their rights and their duties, as I say, to uphold common law, because at the end of the day, that we are the police and the police are us. And that always has been. It's one of Robert Peel's principles, is that we are, the public are the police and the police are the public, but not anymore, unfortunately. It is now a definite them and us. And in my opinion, and it's not me, hating cops, because police are a necessity and we need them to deal with real crimes. But there are so many now that will just follow orders, literally without thinking for themselves anymore. And this is where I think problems are coming from.
Yes. One of the sort of early moves in the background of UK Column was investigating a group called Common Purpose. Who are like a secular and political Masonic type organization. They operate by creating links that are not the official links, and encouraging people to operate beyond their authority and make change happen, even if it's never been approved.
Yeah.
Or mandated by an electorate or anything like this. And one of the things that Brian Gerrish, who was founder of the column and leading up in this, found was he had people coming to him, wives of police officers, and said that my husband went on this course and he's never been the same since. He's a different man. His personality has changed. He despises people now. He doesn't trust the public. And so the feedback we were getting was not just that this change was happening, but it wasn't happening by accident or by a society-wide move. To at least some extent, it was being done to the police.
Mm.
So when you're looking at this sort of this different attitude, could you maybe sort of give us an idea? You said that if you annoy the police, they might teach you a lesson. Could you maybe explain what that might mean in practice?
Yeah, I mean, I can use my example of when they taught me a lesson, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, fine away.
So before I started the channel, Police Abusing Powers channel, I was learning to create website templates. Wasn't very good, but I was learning. One evening, I thought that I would go out. Just up the road from me, there's a police station, fire station, and ambulance station right next to each other. So I thought I'd go up and get a few seconds worth of stock footage. So off I've gone. Absolutely fine, no problem outside the fire station or the ambulance station. Didn't get any footage, so I went round to the back of the police station. I've set up a camera on the pavement, public pavement, set the camera up in full view of their CCTV cameras and everybody else. Ultimately, I was questioned about what I was doing. I explained what I was doing, quite happy to, although I didn't need to because I had done nothing wrong. So ultimately, you have the right to remain silent. So, but I explained to them exactly what I was doing to try and de-escalate anything that may escalate. But then they wanted my details. So I explained to them that I've done nothing wrong. And, I'd already been studying some of the legislations and laws by this point. So I was just explaining to them that I've done nothing wrong. I'm happy to just finish up what I'm doing and then get on my way. No problems at all. But no, it then turned from the fact that I was on public property and it was a little bit odd. It turned from being a little bit odd by one police constable to being surrounded by 8 of them telling me that under Section 44 of the Terrorism Act, which doesn't exist anymore, I could be arrested because of my behaviour, because I wasn't giving my details. Now, I knew at that point Section 44 was no longer in effect. It was repealed some 7 or 8 years ago. And I told them that. And I remained calm throughout the whole thing. I didn't think it would go as far as it did. I remained calm. But because I was responding to their questions or their threats, so it went from Section 44 of the Terrorism Act. So I told him that it doesn't work and it's not implementable anymore. It's not in effect, so leave me alone. Then they went on to causing alarm, harassment and distress. So I told them that I couldn't be causing anyone alarm, harassment and distress because there's nobody about and you've come to me. Then it went from that on to Section 50 of the Police Reform Act. And this is where the lesson teaching comes in. Now, because they couldn't get me on anything else and because I wouldn't just walk away or give them my details, although I'd answered their other questions, Section 50 of the Police Reform Act doesn't require any evidence on their behalf. It just requires a constable's belief. Not reasonable belief, by the way, just a constable's belief that you have or are causing alarm, harassment and distress as defined under Section 5 of the Public Order Act, which I wasn't. But when it gets to that point, you cannot argue your case because they don't need evidence. So you can't disprove their evidence, if that makes sense. So there is ways for them to teach people a lesson. However, I was arrested, I was handcuffed, I was taken to custody, at which point I did give my details. Now, I wasn't going to, because, again, I'd done nothing wrong. But unfortunately, I've got 2 dogs here and there was nobody to look after them. So I had a responsibility. So I had to give my details. However, even upon giving my details, which is then the end of the offence, because the offence is refusing to give your details. So once I gave my details, the offence was over. They still popped me in a cell for 3 hours. Again, this is the lesson teaching. This is don't mess with us. And what people need to understand is the police will go down that route because they still get paid, whether they're off the streets or not, whether they're back at the station dealing with you to teach you a lesson, or whether they're driving around looking for somebody to pick on. They still get paid. So they don't care. But there are, when it comes to the teaching people a lesson, there are ways you can get recourse for that. And obviously making your complaints, which will almost inevitably be dismissed. But then you've also got your civil claim route as well, which is something that I'm following up on at the moment still. So I hope that wasn't just rambling on too much.
No, that's ideal. But the Scottish equivalent is, I think it's breach of the peace, refusing to give your name, and resisting arrest. So if you've done nothing and you get charged with those 3 things, but even the cops realise that this is a nonsense charge. And breach of the peace in Scotland is not the same as breach of the peace in England.
Right. Yeah.
Breach of the peace in Scotland it can be essentially anything. So if you're causing fear and alarm to a reasonable person, then it's breach of the peace. And because it's so wide, it should be an excellent law because it allows judgment to be used. But nowadays, it's being hugely misused, and there's books written on the subject by professors of law in Scottish universities, pointing out that breach of the peace has been used as an instrument of social control.
Yeah.
And I don't like what you're doing. It's nothing to do with the law. I just don't like it. Yeah. Therefore, it's breach of the peace, and we're going to get you for it. And people have, I mean, breach of peace in Scotland can literally include looking at me in a funny way, and people have been convicted on that. So
yeah, absolutely.
It no longer is. There's no basis in lawful behaviour. There's no soundness in judgment. There's no principle of upholding the law. It's about authority now. It's about you will respect my authority.
Yeah, it's opinion-based policing. But something I just wanted to pick up on what you just said there about a reasonable person, whether a reasonable person would feel alarmed or distressed. Yeah. That is very important to actually mention, and I'm glad you said that, because that is, something that people should know. When a lot of the police will use these laws because you're having an interaction with them, not because you're having an interaction with the member of the public. A lot of these police will abuse these laws because you're having an interaction with them and they don't like you. One thing to remember, and this, I can't remember the case name now, but there was a case where a judge turned around and said that swearing at the police is, and this is in England, I'm not sure about up in Scotland, but swearing at the police is part of the course of their duties, being sworn at. They are not seen as the same level as we are in respect to what we can handle from the members of the public. So if somebody told you to F off, you may be alarmed by that, but because the police deal with that on a daily basis, their level has to be a lot higher than yours. Does that make sense? Exactly. So their level of what's reasonable has to have a much higher limit than a normal member of the public. So when they arrest you, or if they try and arrest you or threaten you for swearing at them, don't swear at them when there's people around, however, because then they can get you. But if it's just you and them and you swear at them, there's very little they can do. They have to be able to show that it was an unreasonable level for them. And that's quite difficult, but most people will just accept the fine or the caution.
Well, this is it. This is the point that the Aberdeen law professor was making, that because it's relatively minor offences, people are accepting a fine just to get the thing over and done with and not fighting it. And he's saying people need to stop pleading guilty to this stuff because it's being abused. And this was something actually I would like to talk to you about specifically, is the tendency, because I've noticed this, of innocent people to plead guilty in our system. I don't know if this is one you've come on. We've never discussed this before, two of us. But I've known several cases, and I'm convinced that people say they're innocent. I'm convinced they are innocent. I know the evidence that was held against them, and I consider it to be ridiculous, laughable, and yet they pled guilty. Now, I don't know if this is a Scottish thing more than an English thing, but it goes like this. They're taken away, they're locked up for a few hours, they're very intimidated, they're then given the Scottish justice system, which takes forever. I mean, it goes on for month after month after month, so there's constant pressure in their lives.
Yeah.
They've got some sort of legal representation who's not really on their side.
No. That's
talking to the state, and that will come to them and say, look, you've got no chance. You're definitely going to be convicted. The best thing you can do is plead guilty, because then you'll get a lesser sentence. But there's no chance. If you plead not guilty, I quite believe that you're not guilty, but if you plead not guilty, it'll be more severe.
Yeah.
And they do. They, after months and months and months of this, they plead guilty. Now, one case that I know know very well, because I was campaigning for the chap, was a gentleman called Robert Green, a fine Christian gentleman who was campaigning against child abuse, and they lifted him from his home in England, locked him up in a prison in Scotland, and his health was deteriorating, and he had a heart condition, and it was getting quite severe. And eventually, the Crown mounted 666 pages of evidence against him. An interesting number, I thought. And this was whittled down to basically one page where he had written to the constituency rep of Alex Salmond looking for political support.
Right.
To stop abuse. And that was deemed to have breached an order where he was no longer able to comment on certain people who had been accused of abusing children.
Okay.
And this was, you have to vote. So the QC representing him was saying, I can only keep you out of more jail time if you plead guilty to that. If you plead guilty to that, you won't serve anymore. It became a situation of how well does my heart stand up to something more time in jail? It's very, very difficult. Another case, there was a family who was getting raided frequently by the police. They did a whole series of problems with the police that didn't seem to make any round sense, and they were getting raided. And they got raided at one point, and the whole house was ransacked. The police found nothing. It was allegedly a drugs raid. There was no drugs in the house. And then they got raided again, and there was no ransacking the house. The police went straight to the fridge and allegedly found £10,000 of drugs in the fridge, and then walked out. I didn't search the rest of the house, right? And I know the family, and I know the house, and there wasn't £10,000 of anything in that house,
right?
I don't believe it, but they were told you have to plead guilty or it's jail time. You have to plead guilty for a reduced sentence, and eventually the person accused believed this, pled guilty, and still got the maximum possible sentence. It was before a single judge, and they can only give 1 year unless there's a jury. The maximum is a year. They got a year. So there was it was a lie. So I see this over and over again, that good people and innocent people are intimidated by a system that's designed to intimidate.
Yeah, yeah.
And in which they still have some residual trust to say that they did things that they didn't do.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that we notice is that complaints, being on bail, generally goes on for a long time. You'll find that even if they've got a case where they've got evidence of something, if they're trying to teach someone a lesson, or if they're trying to intimidate somebody, rather than getting them into court quickly and getting it dealt with, they'll just let it run on and on and on and on and on, so that people are under pressure, as you say. People are living their lives with this fear, constantly looking over their shoulder with this weight weighing down on them. The same with the complaints process. You make a complaint and they just stretch it out as long as they can. They tell you that you're not going to win. You can't get anything out of this. Go away, leave us alone. And most people, after a couple of knockbacks, will go, okay, I'll give up. And I think it's the same in the situations that you're saying. I think people will go in and say, it wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. But then they've got so many people saying, but it must have been. How else could we be sitting here in this, interview room if you hadn't have done something? And even if you know full well that, your fridge was completely empty, for example, you start to question yourself. You might not question, well, I definitely didn't, I don't remember it being in there, but maybe it was. But you start to question your ability to be able to fight and your ability to be able to prove your innocence. And I think that, again, as you say, with regards to being told, if you don't admit it, if you don't plead guilty, you could get a much bigger sentence. And that's where I think a lot of people get frightened into confessing or believing that they've actually done something that they shouldn't have done. It's something that it's obviously it's not something that's recent, but it is something that's more prevalent now than it was, although it's always been there. I genuinely think now it is a lot worse than it ever was.
If we could say, just to finish off, we're living in times which are accelerating the loss of liberty across all of the common law jurisdictions, right? Australia, Indeed. New Zealand, all parts of the United Kingdom, United States, it's just galloping forward. And of course, we're expected to submit because science.
Yeah.
Science says allegedly, that we must give up all of our rights. And I saw a top QC saying of the COVID legislation that he can't find anyone who actually understands what the law is on this anymore. It's so confused. Are you seeing things specifically COVID related starting to come into your workload?
Yes, there is. I mean, it's just something that's just popped into my head there. I saw a piece of legislation the other day, which is to do with terrorism, which has been introduced, which is specifically COVID related, to do with terrorism.
How does that even work?
It's to do with retaining fingerprints and DNA from suspects. Okay. But the legislation, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head, I'll have to dig it out and send it over to you, David. But the name of the legislation has COVID in the title, regulations in the title, and it's to do with the terrorism and retention of DNA and fingerprints. And if they're going to do that for that, then there's, I don't think it's going to be long before they start talking about retaining our DNA for longer. Although we know that they keep it anyway, allegedly. But yeah, we're seeing lots of things to do with COVID related. I dealt with a video just the other day. A gentleman went shopping with his children. I probably shouldn't say it, but it was the White Rose, I think it was called, shopping centre in Leeds, I believe. And he was asked to leave for not. And I've spoken to the guy on the phone. He was in there. He had a confrontation with somebody about not wearing a mask. He was asked to leave. He left. On the way out, one of his little girls said, "Look, we're being followed." So he's turned around and he's being followed by a security guard as they've crossed the car park, and they were leaving. They was in the car. They was like halfway across the car park, a good distance from the shopping centre. I think there was 5 or 6 police turned up, grabbed hold of him, almost immediately handcuffed him behind his back in front of his children. And it was all, this was all to do with not having a mask on. And he explained to them, I'm exempt. He said, I've told them in there I'm exempt. They've asked me to leave. I've left. I've done nothing. And ultimately, he was let go with one police constable saying, well, let's just chalk it up to experience, shall we? I mean, honest to God, that's exactly what she said. That's her words quoted. Let's just chalk it up to experience. But this is the kind of thing that we see in the police are policing other people's opinions without using their brains. And I mean, as you said, I mean, more and more people are being involved in these COVID-related incidents. And I say COVID-related because it's just easier to say that, I think, but wearing a mask or being in a group of more than 6 now or whatever it might be, it's easier for me to say COVID related, but it's just getting absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely. But it seems that they're introducing these regulations or guidelines, and they're using the fact that people aren't following guidelines, which are basically advice. They're not, it's not set out. You don't have to do it. It's a guideline or a bit of advice. And it seems that they're using the fact that people aren't following the guidelines to make up these new pieces of legislation, which they can then enforce. But the thing is as well, it's not arrestable. So again, it's not that you're breaking the law. So they can't arrest you for not wearing a mask. for example, they can fine you. But then if you don't pay the fine, it then becomes an arrestable offence, a criminal offence, because you've been fined and you failed to pay it. So that's where they're going. They fine you because it's not a criminal offence, but then if you don't pay the fine, it becomes a criminal offence. And that's how they get, I think that's how they're working this, and a lot of people, teaching a lot of people a lesson again.
Well, one of the things we've noticed in Scotland is that when the government can't get legislation through, because the Scottish government have been particularly unsuccessful in getting legislation through. Some of the very draconian stuff like name person, and there's one currently they're trying to move forward, which is the hate crime bill.
Something I spoke about.
Yes, which is legislating to control how you think, because hate's an emotion. So we're going to criminalise your emotions, and we're going to make judgments about that. So it's inherently totalitarian, just as the name person was inherently totalitarian and quite Stasi-like. And how that was a fascinating story in its own right, how that was actually being rolled out all across the country. And we have the minutes where they discussed that they would roll it out into all professional services, and they wouldn't tell the Scottish people until it was well established in the professions, and then they would tell the Scottish people. So it was kept quiet for a reason, because people could tell what it is. They could see it was fascism. Yeah. So when that failed, the fallback was, well, we'll just put it in as policy. We'll not have it as law, we'll have it as policy. Because for those receiving a government salary, there is actually little or no difference. Because if you break policy, you lose your job. Yeah. If you lose your job in a profession like teaching or social work, you lose your career. And quite possibly your home and your family as well. So the degree of power that comes with that is very substantial, and the state doesn't need it to be a law to force people to comply if those people receive a government salary, government paycheck. So we're seeing this. It's policy is becoming in place of actual law, and then the dividing line between what's policy, what's guidance, what's law. The people administering these rules don't know. They genuinely don't know which is which.
No, and again, that if these people are not being able to see the lines between each, then we can't, members of the public, general members of the public, can't be expected to either. And that just means that the people that are enforcing them can literally say and do what they want in respect of dealing with a member of the public that has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And this could go back to admitting that you've done something wrong, pleading guilty to something because you don't know whether you have or not, but you've been convinced that you have based on somebody that hasn't got a clue either. Scary.
Scary it is, but we are seeing, I think, much more fight back. We're seeing a lot of people,
excuse me,
a lot of people watching your channel, our channel. All these things are growing, and people understanding that they can stand on the law and they can understand the law, because it becomes at core some very simple concepts about treating others as you would have them treat you, about not causing loss or harm, about not using fraud, not deceiving. It becomes things which are very innate to human understanding.
Yeah, it's very basic stuff, really. So, if you think about it, it is very basic stuff. Don't cause harm, loss, or damage. Don't defraud. And you can even look at and I'm not a religious person, but even if you look at the 10 Commandments, if you ever learnt that in school, living by those kind of rules, if you like, your own personal rule book, if you like, will keep you generally from breaking any laws. Although, as we've said, some people will try and suggest that you have when you haven't. But I think it's a moral thing as well, isn't it? It's. I think that most members of the public have got the morals to be able to do that, to be able to live under those conditions, if you like. No harm, no loss, no damage to other people, because you wouldn't like it done to you. But people are out there trying trying to push people into trying to demoralize people, seeing as we've just used the moral. They're trying to demoralize people and push them into a position where they can, we'll use the police in this instance, where they can arrest them and you know, stick another tick box on the computer data system so they get some more funding next year. Rather than actually dealing with the actual crimes. Do you see what I mean? And it is all politicised now.
It's a very important point. It is politicised, and it's important that we all refuse to become demoralised and know that we're not alone, and that people who can see that this is not how it should be are not alone. And that's where your site and many others form an essential part of the pushback against this, to teach people, educate them, and encourage them. So, Dan, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all you do and for talking to me today. It's been a real pleasure.
That's absolutely fine. I appreciate you asking me to come and have a chat with you. It's been nice. We'll have to have another chat at some point.